All right, welcome back to Prestige Motorsports. Today we're going to talk about two engines on the floor ready to ship. If you're watching a lot of people out there, that's kind of becoming the norm of, having stuff on the floor. I can say when really long time ago, that was our goal, was like a 2-week turnaround on a personalized engine package. And through the pandemic, getting parts has been very hard, still is. Things are getting better. But we probably have nearly 60 some blocks, ranging from small block Ford, big block Chevy, LS, fully machined, ready to be cleaned and painted. We have serial numbered rotating assemblies, so crank, rods, pistons, ready to go in these, done. I don't know if they'd said 50 to 75 of those. If you see our CNC machine out there is running 24/7, cutting all of our cylinder heads, Brodex Track 1, the AFR casting, the big block offshore stuff. Point here is we got a ton of stuff in stock to build these rapidly. Number two, and I guess people don't want to wait, even if it's personalized, they don't want to wait for it, and I get that. So a first couple of engines we picked was our 347, 425 horse, very popular package for us. We have an EFI version here, carbureted version here. So these are on the floor, ready to ship. Let's dive into the details. We'll start with the carbureted package. And I've said this for years. Obviously, we want to try to compare apples to apples, but also how many apples are you getting? And what I mean by that is I've got, competitors that are very, very good engine builders. They build a good product. They back it with a great warranty. And for those of you that are in that like price, pricing your stuff to the bottom, that's not our business model. One, and I'll talk about it later, is the customer service, that we actually answer the phone. We have a tremendous amount of knowledge to help you put it in the car. This is invaluable information that's at your fingertips if you purchase from us. Sometimes even if you don't. So what we look at when I say apples to apples, or how many apples, you're going to see certain companies on turnkey long blocks, whether it be carburetor or EFI, that after they test them, they remove the harmonic balancer. Forces you to go find the correct one. But a bigger point is the timing pointer. So typically when you're building the engine, you put a bridge gauge across the top of the block to measure when the piston's at top dead center. Then we verify the timing pointer matches the timing tape on the balancer. Timing is so critical to the engine. In itself, that's probably one of the biggest things. And who's to say as you press that thing on there or use a installation tool that we don't damage the seal, creating our own leak. And this is now, we're going to put it in the vehicle, start it up, and hope to have a successful installation, to then have to remove the entire front pulley system or the balancer. You got the radiator in the way. It just becomes a nightmare. So number one, the balancer is left on the engine and installed and properly TDC'd. All right, number two, a little bit lower, is the oil pan. Any stroker engine out there should have an aftermarket style oil pan. The reason is, let's say you got a 4.5 or whatever 5-quart stock pan. Number one, there's no baffles to help with controlling the oil and keeping it around the pickup. Let's remember, the oil is the lifeblood of the engine. Without it, it's not going to run for very long. So we want a bit deeper pan, because that same 4.5 or 5-quart oil pan, a stroker from the center of the crank to the throw of the connecting rod is now longer. They've stroked it, they've increased the length. As it rotates, it dips deeper in the oil pan. If you don't run less oil in that oil pan, which now you have less capacity, higher temperatures, if you don't run less, then you're going to create windage, because the crank is going to slap through the oil, and it will do that even without having baffles in it, because you accelerate and all the oil wants to go to the back of the oil pan, gets caught in the crankshaft. That's why we have baffles, crank scrapers. So when you're windaging, you're creating this vortex and foaming. So number one, now we got foamed up oil. Number two, we're basically blowing all the oil away from the pickup right where we really need it when we're accelerating. So oil pans, we don't cheap out here. They always have an aftermarket oil pan. These ones are shown with a front sump. Obviously very easy to change it, and we'll put a rear sump on it, okay? And as we move up, we also use, and I'm very nitpick, they're black gaskets instead of blue, only because a black engine with blue gaskets, it's ugly, in my opinion. Those are the details when you deal with the Prestige, but it is a one-piece steel embossed gasket. What that allows us to do is actually torque the bolts with Loctite, and we're not worried about crushing a cork gasket. If you've ever dealt with oil leaks, whether it be valve covers, and we'll get to that, and the oil pan, it's usually because either you over torqued it and it spit the cork out, or the bolts eventually get loose because the cork gets a little spongy, and then basically the pan starts to not fall off, but it leaks. So oil pan gasket, front damper. We'll move up a little further in the engine package. So I wasn't really going to focus on the internals a whole lot. I mean, but it's important. So ours is going to have, in the factory block, is a cast steel crank, forged rod, and it is cap screw style bolts, not studs. And it also carries a forged piston. A lot of people run hyper-eutectic. I would be very careful. Again, if we don't have the timing right and we get a bad tank of fuel, or timing's right, got a bad tank of fuel, if this thing goes in detonation, a hyper-eutectic piston is as hard as glass. It's like running a hammer on it, and you're going to have a piston laying in the oil pan. We will not reduce the cost of the motor, which we could be more competitive if we went away from a really good designed forged piston, not some old slug, like really nice ring stack, 1.2 millimeter, 3 millimeter oil ring, a really good side relief forging, 4032 forged, could spray a little nitrous, probably should not, but it's essential in our opinion. We're not going to back it with a warranty, even though it's not your fault. You get a bad tank of fuel, we fill it up with 93, but did we really get 93? It starts pinging, it doesn't take long. Either we've got a piston in the oil pan or we've got a blown head gasket. So, rotating assembly, cast crank, forged rods with cap screws, and 4032 forged pistons with a really nice ring stack. This would be pretty standard, but I have seen some competitors battle this out. But ARP Hardware. Okay, you don't need necessarily ARP studs for your oil pan. I mean, it is just an oil pan. We really don't need ARP hardware and grade 8 hardware per se for the manifold. What we choose to do, so we run ARP, all of our head bolts, all of our head studs, main studs, ARP. Essential areas of the motor. We prefer Allen head cap screws, and they're all, I think they're 304 stainless, but they're all Allen head caps and really nice hardened washers. They keep the engine looking cleaner than an old school 6-point. Now, if you wanted 12-point polished stainless from ARP, we'll certainly do that. It's just not necessarily essential, but the hardware, and then just as the oil pan gasket's a one-piece steel embossed, not a one-piece rubber, but steel embossed. That's very important because you can torque it. Same thing with the valve covers. So we have a good rigid valve cover, just like this Ford Racing one over here. It's got a baffle in it. It's not flimsy. It's not sheet metal. That's chrome. That's going to rust. This will last a long time, if not forever. It will look good, and it will not leak because we can torque these bolts down. Something to point out too is that when we dyno test each and every engine package that we do, is that the valve cover bolts are one of the last things. Once it's in the crate, we pull each individual bolt out one by one, Loctite them, and retorque them. And this is just because obviously in the dyno room, after some break-in procedures, we remove the valve cover, we do a valve spring and valve train check, visually inspect everything, make sure there's no debris in the oil, just anything that could happen that you don't see, and we put the cover back on. But in shipping, we don't want these loosening up once you get it and put it in your car, so those are Loctited and torqued down. So now we'll move to the fuel and ignition, and that's what's going to differentiate these two. And before I go there, cylinder heads. I'll keep this brief. So this is our cylinder head. It is an offshore casting, okay? And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. I see a lot of comments about that. A lot of big companies, a lot of big names actually source from overseas. Again, nothing wrong with that. 20 years ago, that was a lot different. Everything was American made. The fact is, it isn't anymore. So it's left up to the engine builder to validate that stuff through and through. Do we hardness check it? You know, valve guide clearance to valve stem. What is our valve or valve seat run out? If you've seen in past videos, we have some of the most state-of-the-art equipment here to verify and validate that we don't have those problems. So we've hardness checked this stuff. We have a CERTI profile, so the seat or the valve seats are all done on a profile machine. That is one of the best machines on this planet to do a valve job. We also hand hone at each and every guide, and we obviously select our own valve trains, so our own stainless steel valves and hand selected springs. Those springs are either PAC or PSI, well-known name brands. Even then though, why do we dyno test? Well, we've had valve springs that rated fine. They used to turn 65, 6800. Now we hit valve float at 62 for some reason. We're validating, we're picking out anomalies, and we scrutinize everything. So I think that's really important to know that. So the differentiating part. We do leave the spark plugs in it. Might sound stupid. Again, the validation deal, I can't tell you how many spark plugs we've had that are grounding out internally. The motor's down 40, 50 horsepower, but it's really not missing. Change the plugs, problem solved. So we do leave the spark plugs in them. A lot of people don't. We do include the custom fit wires and looms. Got our nice billet loom holders and custom fit wires. You'll notice this one's a little tighter. Dual sync distributor, which is a smaller cap, and then we have on the carbureted one the large cap. But it keeps it clean and organized. I mean, we're building a nice car, you want a nice engine, this is essential, you know, at least in our opinion. So quality stuff, Ford Racing wires, billet looms, MSD distributor, okay? And it includes the box, the coil, and the coil bracket. So we're giving you stuff that will actually be needed on installation. Why are these components important? This will always pack more punch than any large cap HEI distributor. Plus, although this is a little bit larger cap than that, it's still not nearly as ugly as some bulky old freaking HEI with a coil on it. Just looks hideous. And being a Ford guy, I mean, the distributor's up front. It's a focal point. Let's make sure it looks good. All right? So, moving on, air gap manifold. Air gap gets air between the carburetor base and, well, carburetor base and the lifter valley area. There's a lot of heat there. It's very important because although we really don't do many carburetors anymore, vapor lock and boiling of fuel is a huge, huge problem. There's a lot of you who probably have it and don't even realize what's going on. We just think the carburetor doesn't run right or something's happening. Nobody really knows. But we know from testing and validation, fuel, it boils at as low as 100 degrees today. Well, most of the time we're driving our car when it's, you know, hot outside. So it's key that we got the air gap, and we don't use any Edelbrock carburetors typically because they hold all the fuel in the body of the carburetor. So we want, you know, a traditional Holley-based, quick fuel, good quality carburetor. That way there's airflow around those fuel bowls to try to avoid vapor lock at best case scenario. We include the fuel log, which is a nice billet fuel log, and these are dual feed double pumpers. I can't stress that enough. if you jump on it, you bought it because it's got 400 or 500 horsepower. When we put the pedal to the metal, I want to go. I don't want to wait for a vacuum secondary to slowly open up or the thing to backfire because it's lean. So just small things that really separate ours when we look at, you know, the carburation, the air gap manifold, quality fuel log, distributor, the box, the coil, the wires. It looks great. We got a balancer, for goodness sake. So, you know, and we can take this and go much further. But this is $10,500 ready to go with good equipment. All right, so I explained kind of a bit about the wires, the looms, the cylinder heads. Basically this one, Holley Terminator X EFI. It's using an injector per cylinder, and then it's their manifold. We do Holley's manifold, mass flow. We do, obviously you've seen high rams. We do pretty much anything and everything, but this is Holley's intake manifold, their rails, and it just depends on availability. It'd be the Holley throttle body, that one's an Edelbrock, or AccuFab. And really, again, it's just an availability thing that kind of highlights our adaptability. I will say I do like the Edelbrock ones because they have the map sensor actually built in. Whether you use that or an external one doesn't really matter, but it is all fully loaded. So the idle air control sensor, TPS, and map sensor, along with intake manifold air temp. So this, again, all tested, your wiring harness, your ECU, this ignition system, exactly the way you see it. This is the way it was tested. This will also come with the MSD box, the coil, and the bracket. This one is $13,500, so it's about $3,000 more than the carbureted version, which makes sense. Any good EFI system is going to cost you around $2 to $3 grand more. It's been like that for 20 years. Now, we do not do any throttle body fuel injection. Stay tuned for a video on that as we highlight that in a lot more detail. But before I close this out, or if, I guess my closing remarks are, these are quality products for a customer that cares about detail. If none of these details matter, then what we do as a company doesn't matter. And there's plenty of other companies to buy from. But if you want something that sets yourself apart, a little bit better quality, and the customer service to back it up, we will get online and we will monitor the first startup. I will remotely tune your vehicle for you. In the event you have a diagnostic issue, we'll remote in, we'll check that. Most of my customers have my cell phone number. Look at this. This thing has got some miles on it. And unless I've left it in the shop somewhere, you can pretty much always get a hold of me. And I think we really pride ourselves on customer service, 3 years, unlimited mileage warranty, everything's tested, and you can get these long blocks are done today on the floor. Add anything else you want from our ultimate turnkey package line. Thanks for watching. Oh yeah, mother asking about a warranty? Oh yeah, it's a taillight warranty.